Hello, I'm Sue Lisk. I'm your Town of Maine historian and curator of the Nanticoke Valley Historical Society. I'm honored to welcome you all to the Maine Cemetery, where we celebrate the history and the headstones by bringing the past to life. Our costumed actors will tell the stories of the lives of our former residents in Maine Village. We will travel through time to give you a chance to hear Dr. Dwight Dudley tell about his interesting life. Layla Ketchum Marine will tell her tragic story. Veteran Private Stephen Vandenberg, Marion Warner, and Glenn Walter, all former residents of Maine Village, also are part of our tour. The Maine Cemetery was first started in a lot by the Congregational Church Society of Maine, and where their first church was once standing. Today there are 3,745 people buried here, but the first burial was the body of Groves Lawson on April 14, 1816. He was 8 months old when he died. On March 17, 1836, the property became the Maine Cemetery Corporation, and more land was added to make it the large cemetery it is today. Now, let's start that trip back in time.
Welcome to Maine Cemetery. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Dwight Dudley, the physician here in Maine Village. The Dudleys have an interesting family history, if I may say, and you might know a bit about us already thanks to my daughter Myra, who donated many of our family possessions to the Nanticoke Valley Historical Society Museum. Myra, who was born in 1885, lived to the ripe old age of 104 before passing in 1989. She was the last member of our family and is also buried here. I was born in 1841 and lived in Maine Village most of my life as well. My wife, Alice Haskins Dudley, was a widow when we first met, due to the unfortunate circumstance of her first husband, Vernon Taylor, being struck down by a terrible malady that left half of his body paralyzed. And before he passed, not 10 minutes after saying I do, the attending physician said it was due to his collar being on too tight, if you can imagine such a thing. But nonetheless, after that unpleasantness, Alice and I met and were married in 1884. We had 4 beautiful children, Myra, who I mentioned, as well as Jessie, George, and Dee Guilford. In my youth, I took an interest in medicine, so I enrolled and graduated from the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University in New York City. Immediately thereafter, however, the Civil War broke out, so I enlisted in the Union Army. But not being satisfied with simply enlisting, I convinced none other than the Secretary of War himself, E.M. Stanton, to appoint me to the first group of 140 medical cadets. And at the age of 23, I became the youngest commanding officer in the Union Army, put in charge of Barracks A at the Elmira prison camp. Following the Civil War, I returned here and established my practice, which I operated for 50 years from my office out of my home on McGregor Avenue, and I made many, many house calls. In my later life, I also belonged to many foundations, societies, and institutions. Most notably, I was the president of the Binghamton Board of U.S. Pensioners. In 1920, I retired, and Alice and I moved to Endicott. In 1921, the following year, on May 19th, I too passed. But if you ask me, I had a wonderful life. Very good.
Good afternoon. I'm happy you stopped by for a visit. I'd like to tell you about the love for Henry Marine. Henry and I grew up in the Maine Village. Have you ever been there? There's a beautiful pagoda right in the center of Maine, in front of the Ketchum Inn. My parents owned the inn. That's where we lived. Since the inn provided rooms and meals for people who visited the Maine Village, I had plenty of work to do. There were many events held there too. Henry worked for his father in the F&H Marine and Son, right next to our inn. Henry and I fell in love. I was 15 and he was 20. When we became engaged, we kept it a secret for 3 years, until we felt we were old enough to marry. And for Henry to ask my father for my hand in marriage. They insisted we wait until I was 18. So, we married in May 1865. During our engagement, Henry spent a lot of time in Binghamton, Syracuse. We both wrote in diaries that we shared with each other, and I wrote poetry. After the wedding, Henry worked in Syracuse for 4 months. I prepared to set up housekeeping and finally moved to Syracuse to join him. We were only together for 1 month. Before I died in childbirth, I didn't even have time to spend with my little baby Layla. My family raised her in the main village. So this is our tragic love story. I was a wife and a mother for a short period of time. Etched in my tombstone are the words, "Meet me in heaven."
Right. Nice to see all you civilians in the cemetery on such a fine summer day, where I have come back to tell you my story. I, Stephen Vandenberg, was born in Greene County, New York in 1816. As a Civil War veteran, I served as a private in Company F, Infantry Regiment New York Volunteers. I enlisted, mustered February 13th, 1864, and discharged June 17th, 1865. During that time, I fought at Cold Harbor, Virginia, where I was wounded in the back of my head by an exploded shell on June 5th, 1864. I also injured my back, spine, and kidneys near Petersburg, Virginia. It was a brutal time, and when I came home to my wife Sally and the children, I was not the same man as when I was to fight for this noble cause. In 1878, I moved to Maine. Due to my war injuries, I had to give up farming and could only do small chores around the house. In the end, I was totally blind. I passed away in 1896. And throughout the years, my original headstone deteriorated to the point that it came to the attention of Mrs. Benjamin Harrison, tent number 2 of the Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War. In 2019, Mrs. Harrison, along with a number of volunteers, replaced the original with this new headstone. Now I can continue the sleep that knows no waking.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Marion Warner, and I have come to tend to my husband Ray's grave. He passed away in 1969. He's right over there. He actually died quite suddenly. He collapsed on our kitchen floor in our home in Upper Lewis Street, leaving me with a very young family of 4. He was actually one of the first people, though, to be buried in this new section. After Ray had passed, I was pretty distraught. So I had him buried in the Endicott Cemetery, the Riverhurst Cemetery. But after a time, I went on to work at IBM for several years, and I moved into a home on McGregor Avenue in the Hamlet. And then I decided that I wanted to have him reinterred. So I bought this plot here in Maine Cemetery. And we had a small ceremony at the gravesite and a reception at the home afterwards. For the day, I ordered a cake from Wegmans. And when I went to pick it up, several of the bakery staff were gathered around. The sales clerk had said that everybody wanted to see who had ordered the cake with the coffin and the sentiment, "Welcome home, Ray." Finally, in 2008, I passed away, and I was buried next to Ray. It's right here. Thank God I don't have to get up in the morning.
Hello, welcome to Maple Glen Farm. There's a wonderful view here. This is a farm that is known for its great dairy products in the Nanticoke Valley. And this week we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Walter family buying this farm and making it a successful part of the Nanticoke Valley history. My parents, Emmett and Gertrude, bought this farm on March 14, 1921. They're actually buried up on the hill up here alongside the family of my brother Clyde. Clyde and I worked this farm for our parents, and in the Depression it was still successful because we not only had dairy products, but we grew garlic, we had a lot of maple syrup products, we had lots of other things that kept us going during the Depression. In 1939, I married my sweetheart, Barbara. I called her Bobby, affectionately called Bobby. And World War II soon came up, and I got a deferment from serving in the military because the country needed dairy farms so much. And so I stayed here as a dairy farm worker supporting the war effort. After the war, Bobby and I bought the farm from my parents, and things started getting modernized. We actually bought our first tractor in 1950, and we were able to retire our wonderful draft horses, which we used to carry the cans of milk to the creamery in town. Machinery became more and more part of the farming. We bought milking machines. We had a big, huge vat in which we kept the milk, and milk started to get picked up. So it turned out that farming became more of a machinery, and often you'd see me walking around like this with coveralls and a grease rag, taking care of machinery and trying to keep things clean. Bobby and I had two children, Linda and Wayne, nicknamed Bucky, and Bucky is buried here, and he died in 2015. Bucky is known as the quote-unquote inventor of the weather rock, which is a novelty item that would 100% accuracy predict the weather. And it's still sold as a novelty item today. Sells 20 to 30,000 a year. Really wonderful. Sandy is Bucky's daughter. Sandy still operates the farm along with her partner Bob Marshman, and they have a number of products that particularly garlic products that they still use and sell in the area. Unfortunately, Bob is no longer with us. He recently passed away, but Sandy still maintains the presence of the Walter family on this farm in the Nanticoke Valley for 100 years. The stone that you see here that marks the burial spot of both Bobby and I has a Stratton painting on here of the farm that I loved. So we put it on the tombstone. And there's a statement on the bottom of the tombstone that reflects the feeling of Bobby and I. It says, "Our work is done, our troubles are now past. We're walking through green pastures, and we are home at last."